right, good evening, everyone. I'm April Cushing. I'm an adult services librarian at the Norwood Library. And tonight, Paul Clerici is going to give us an insider's look at the Boston Marathon. Paul is a local best-selling author from Walpole, and he's run 43 marathons, including the Boston Marathon, 23 times. He's covered the race and the sport of running for over 30 years, and he's the author of 6 books, including Images of Modern America, the Boston Marathon, and Boston Marathon History by the Mile, both of which he will talk about tonight. If you're interested in purchasing any of his books, they're available through his website, paulclerici.com, through Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, as well as the independent bookstores in the area. One more thing about Paul, he is also the director of the Kami 5K Run and David 5K Walk in Walpole, which he started in memory of 2 of his family members. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat, and I will read them aloud to Paul, and he will answer them as he goes along. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to you now, Paul, and thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you, April. I appreciate that, and thank Brian and the Norwood Library as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. First of all, I do want to say that the reason you don't see me speaking is I don't have a webcam. So we worked around that. So you'll see some photos that are featured from my books. That if this was an in-person book talk, you'd be seeing that behind me on the big screen. So that's why you don't see me. And if there's any glitches, sometimes the vocals go in and out. I apologize. I'm not trying to be rude. But yes, if you have any questions, definitely send them in, and we'll talk about that as we speak. Well, I'll briefly give you a little history of the marathon. The Boston Marathon began in 1897. The year before, at the 1896 Modern Olympic Games, the Boston Athletic Association, the BAA, sent some of their runners to compete in the Olympics. And they did really well, too, gold medals. One of the events at the Olympics was the marathon. At the time, it was about 24, 25 miles, usually 24 and a half. So the BAA members, when they returned home, brought that idea with them. Because at the time, they had the BAA Games, which was a number of events that ended at a track, the oval track, behind where the Boston Public Library is now. It's no longer there. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to end the BAA Games with this marathon. So they measured the distance, which was about 24 and a half miles. They went toward the west, and it ended in Ashland, and that's how the marathon started in Ashland in 1897. So that's a little brief history of the Olympic connection to the Boston Marathon. Again, that was back in 1897. We'll sort of go in order of the course. We'll start with the Hopkinton photo that I have of the Athletes Village, which is interesting because prior to 1996, the centennial, they didn't really have a village. But with nearly 38,000 runners for the 100th anniversary in 1996, they created this Athletes Village, which they still have now. And as you can see, it's behind the Hopkinton High School, the football field, with plentiful porta potties on the right, which we all need, and a stage in the middle for calisthenics and announcements. What's interesting about 96 as well with the centennial is if you New Englanders remember, or those of you who were there, a day or two before it snowed, nearly a foot, some areas over a foot of snow. So that whole field and the whole course was covered with snow, so they really had a tough time getting all that snow off the grass, knowing there'll be so many people there in a day or two. So one of the things Dave McGilvery did, the race director, is he had a couple of Army helicopters hover about 100 feet above the ground to sort of help dry the snow, which I always joke with Dave that I hope he told the neighbors about that. Imagine waking up to having those Army helicopters hovering above. But it actually worked. They put some sawdust and some hay. I remember a lot of us, the runners, because I ran that year as well, had little shopping plastic bags on your feet to cover your shoes so it wouldn't get muddy because it was very muddy. And then you have to walk 7/10 of a mile from that Athletes Village to the starting line. So it's a long walk, so you don't want your shoes to get all muddy. But that was interesting, having all those people there at the village. The next photo that we'll see is the Hopkinton Common with the famous "It All Starts Here" sign. That is actually the gentleman that you see in the bottom left corner lying down is one of our great marathoners in American history. It's 1972 gold medal winner Frank Shorter, just lying down. And he was actually covering the race a year or two. He actually ran it himself competitively But a couple of years he ran it for the news coverage. He would be mic'd up and he would run it and give commentary while he was running. And that year, the year of this photo, he did that. And if you see the couple of white houses in the background there, that's Hayden Row, side street that bisects Main Street. And for a number of years, the marathon actually started on that street. From 1965 to 85, most our generation remember the Bill Rogers, Bobby Gibbs, Joe Benoit Samuelson's races started there. So when the gun went off, you had to run really fast, up a couple hundred yards, Hayden Row, and take a right onto Main Street. So you had a tough turn there right at the beginning of the race to start. Now, as you know, it's on Main Street, so you have a nice straightaway. Yeah, back then you had to start on a side street, and for the 100th, they used that side street as well to accommodate all the people. If you remember those aerial photos, all of Main Street was full of runners, and the side streets were full of runners, and they let sections of runners go at a time until all 38,000+ runners crossed the starting line. So it was a monumental effort that they did quite well. The next photo that you'll see, still in Hawkinton, is a full Main Street of runners. You see people from curb to curb. This is in the old days. Right now, when you go and see the start, you'll see police fencing sort of cut the road in half a little bit with open road to the left and right where the water station is. But back then, what you did is you just filled the street from curb to curb, and actually a natural bottleneck would occur because the most narrow portion, obviously, is Murphy's Law at the starting line, and it's wider with this picture here. And you would just be jammed in, the gun would go off, and before the chip timing, before the centennial, where bib numbers had a chip, went off at noon, your running time started at noon. If it took you 10, 15, 20 minutes across the starting line, you already that much time into your race. Although fortunately, back then the BAA would sort of figure out a time to deduct, and they would send you a little index card saying, okay, you were in corral number 12,000. We estimate it took you 8 minutes across the starting line, so you can deduct 8 minutes. They don't do that anymore, which I wish they did, but they have the chip timing, which is much better. But Dave McGilvey, the race director, solved this problem as well with a bottleneck. He measured Main Street. He found out that the widest part was about 89 feet, 85 feet, and the narrowest part was 35 feet, I think, which was near the starting line itself. So what he did was he put those police barracks, those fencing, those metal fencings that you see, streamlined Main Street at 25 feet. So it's 25 feet from side to side all the way down Main Street. And I remember the first year he did that, I'm thinking, well, now I'm farther back from the starting line. But because it's streamlined, there's no bottleneck, he actually got through much quicker, which is what he continues to do now. So it actually worked out quite well. Dave really knows how to figure these things out. Being a good management and also good runner as well, he figures out things from both ends, which is nice. The next photo, still in Hopkinton, is the start line, which they paint quite well. As a runner, you may not look down because you look at the camera, you smile into the camera and wave to the fans. But when you see the starting line, which actually you can go there, they painted like the week before the marathon, and usually marathon weekend, a lot of people make a trip up there, and the Hopkinton police will actually stop traffic if you want to jump on the road and get your picture taken on the starting line. They're really accommodating like that. And Jack LeDuc, for years, he just retired doing this, painted the starting line. And each year he would include something neat on the starting line itself. The year I took this, the 114th, 10 years ago, you'll see a wreath there coming up in gold. The year that Johnny Kelly passed away, Johnny the Elder Kelly, he painted a nice little picture of Johnny Kelly. Dave McGilvery's 40th year that he ran, they put a little 40 marker with his initials. There's always something. I think the first year of the wave starts, he painted waves on the starting line. So each year is a nice little personal touch, which is kind of neat to do on the starting line. His daughters helped for a while doing that as well. So it's a real neat thing to see. A lot of people take pictures of that every year. It's a nice touch. And a lot of races just have a line, which, Boston did for a number of years. But it's nice to have a little touch like that. The next picture, we're going to enter Ashland, the second town of the marathon, but where the marathon actually started, as I mentioned. This is right on the town line, and it's interesting that you'll see, I know a lot of the runners are always cautious not to go out fast, but what's neat is that you'll see the little downhill here in Ashland, and it's interesting that you're in Hopkinton about 2 miles, 1.9 miles. So you're about 2 miles into it right now as a runner, but it's still pretty solid runners. You're still packed together. But back in the late 80s, when Dave McGilley was the technical director, not yet the race director, in 1 year of the race, he had the wheelchair athletes, which they started a few minutes before noon. They still had a noontime start. So the wheelchair athletes will go first. But that particular year, I think it was 87 or 88, this portion of the road that you see had just been paved. And it was dew mist that morning, which sort of made it a little slick. And when the wheelchair athletes went off a little bit before noon, they slid down here, and some crashed into each other. Some fell off into the grass on the right. A lot of accidents. They were okay. Athletes, they bounced back. They didn't mind. They were athletes. But it's something that needed to be corrected. And the same race, about 10 minutes later, when the open race began, in those days they had a rope that was one volunteer on one side of the course, one volunteer on the other, holding a rope across the chests of the runners up front. And when the gun went off at noon, like slightly before, they would usually give like a 10-second countdown. They would drop their rope on one end and then sort of scooch it off the course to the other end. But that year, the same year as the wheelchair accident, they didn't get the rope off all enough, and all the runners took off, and part of the rope was still there and tripped a lot of the runners who fell. So to solve those things, Dave McGillivray figured out two different things. For the wheelchair athletes, he had a vehicle in front of the wheelchair athletes, so when they went off, they couldn't race until they got to the bottom of this hill on this picture. There's like a white line painted. Once they crossed that, they could just go and race. But they were controlled start from this little hill, downhill. They don't do that anymore because the wheelchair athletes, after a while, said, we can handle it. Our wheelchairs are much more aerodynamic. So they don't do that anymore. But for a number of years, that's what they did to solve any of those problems. And for the runners, instead of a rope, what Dave thought of was having volunteers shoulder to shoulder to act as that barrier. So when he gave that 10-second countdown, the volunteers would separate and step on the sidewalk. So when the gun went off, the runners went unimpeded. And so he solved both problems. In the following year, the BAA made him race director. So Dave said, well, it's either good or bad that I did well. But he got the job. That was good.
Excuse me, Paul. We have
yes.
Someone has written in a question.
Sure.
When you ran Boston for the first time, what was the longest distance you had run before that? And also, did you train with a formal training program?
Oh, good question. In training, what I do, I'm not an elite athlete, so they do more. I don't run more than 20 miles. 3 weeks before the marathon and 6 weeks before a marathon is where I'll put the 20-mile run in any marathon. And then I'll mix in some 17 miles, some 15 miles, 18 miles accordingly. But I don't go more than 20 miles because the fitness and the training will take you over the last 10K of the race. So I felt comfortable doing that. Some people do 22, 24. But to me, there's a point where it becomes repetition in your body. And 20 miles was fine for me to do it. And again, I've run Boston 23 times, so it worked. And I'm a Clydesdale, for those runners who know. Clydesdale are men who weigh 200 pounds or more. I'm about 270. So I had some weight to carry, and it worked. It worked for me. Actually, I forgot the other part.
Oh, well, I'd say, well, there's another question. What were the greatest lessons you've learned from all your marathons?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. It's funny. It's the things that everyone tells you, running-wise, everyone tells you, do not go out fast. And the halfway point of any marathon is about 20-mile mark. It's true. It's like in addition to Boston, I've run 20 other marathons, and give or take, the course and the topography, that is true. Don't go out fast because you feel great. You can do the fastest mile in your life because you've been training for a marathon, and then you explode toward the end of the marathon. So as a runner, that's what I've learned the most for those two things, and really don't sweat the small stuff. It's a funny thing to say. There's so many things that you can worry about in a marathon, and just don't. Just enjoy it. Let your training take over. Enjoying it is a great big part of it too. I mean, if you stress over it, that can affect your focus. Don't think anything negative. Just really enjoy it. You got to have bad patches. Another thing I learned is expect to have bad patches. And the first couple of marathons I ran, I sort of panicked, going, "Oh my goodness, I have a side stitch. I don't feel good. Wait, I'm hitting the wall." It's okay. After a while, you go, "That's okay. I should expect that." So you're still going to experience it, but expecting it, you'll go, "Okay, here it comes, bad patch." Everyone, even the elites have it. It just doesn't last as long for the elites. But you're going to feel different bad patches, and if you just expect them, I'm not talking an injury where you break your leg when you're running, but your normal wear and tear, and just enjoy it. It really is a big part of it like that. Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you for that, Paul.
Yeah, and thanks for the questions too. Keep them coming.
Okay.
I love it. The next picture we left off, you'll see the Marathon Park sign, which is in Ashland. Ashland's really done well with their history. The first 27 Boston Marathons were run in Ashland at 3 different starts. 1897 and 1898 it started on Pleasant Street, where this Marathon Park sign is. And then the BAA built a clubhouse near the Boston Public Library, so they moved the finish line to finish in front of their clubhouse. Therefore, they had to move the start. So they moved the start to the High Street Bridge, if you want to go and visit it. It's the bridge that goes over the Amtrak, the commuter rail. And then after so many runners were running, like 100, like, "Oh, the bridge can't hold this," So then they moved it again to actually the current 4-kilometer mark of the Boston Marathon is the last place in Ashland where it started. So when you run the Boston Marathon and you go over the 4-kilometer mark, that's actually the site of the last of the 3 places that started in Ashland. So when the marathon distance increased to the 26.2 miles, they just measured up the road and it ended up being in Hopkinton. But it's interesting, Marathon Park is where it started, and you can go there. They've had some races at the starting line, where the original starting line was on Pleasant Street. It's not too far from the start. A crow's flight's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles, but you have to go and do a sort of a U-turn drive. Just check the directions for that. It's real easy to get to. It's worth seeing. They have some nice informational plaques behind this blue plaque. There used to be a mill there that made boxes for shoes. It got burned down in the 30s, but they rebuilt the area to have some sidewalk areas and benches and little monuments there, and they're increasingly improving it. So it's a great place to go for history of the race, too, in Ashland. The next photo that you'll see, the black and white, is actually the 1899 race. This is the 3rd year of the Boston Marathon. This was down Main Street in Ashland. And you can see how dusty the roads are. Can you imagine running marathon back then on all the dust? They had cyclists who would go with you. Sometimes they had little water canteen vehicles that would be pedaled along the way. It was really dirty and dusty, and just a handful of runners doing this for, at that time, 24 to 25 miles. But you can see how much has changed a little bit. But just imagine that kind of dust and dirt, which we don't have now. Although some marathons, not Boston, still goes on courses like that, which I've run, and cobblestones and dirt and everything. But Boston in the early days did that. So there's an interesting photo, the Ashland Historical Society photo there. I love that one. I use that for my book. They gave me a couple other ones to use too, which was great. The next photo.
Oh, excuse
yes.
me, Paul. We've got a couple more questions that have just come in.
Shoot.
Someone said it sounds like you say you weigh over 200 pounds. What do you suggest?
Oh, yeah.
What do you suggest for running shoes for larger runners?
Without promoting it, but I used the New Balance ones early on because they had a roll bar on your heel because you need a little more support with the running shoes. I think everyone has something to that extent now. So just try to find something that has a good cushioned heel, thicker than most. I have size 15, so I need big ones. So try to find, that's the biggest thing because the cushion on your shoe, another trick that you can find if your cushion on your shoe isn't that good, especially for a heavy runner, male or female, is if your ankle, knee, or hip starts to ache. Because what's happening is your ankle, knee, or hip is absorbing what the running shoe should be absorbing. So that's a good indicator of I may need to get new shoes. On average, it goes 400 or 500 miles a shoe. Usually try by 2 to kind of even it out. But that's the biggest thing. They have that roll bar. I don't know if that name is like a trademark roll bar, any kind of support bar, whatever they may call it, under the heel, helps for pronation too, and also the thicker heel. So that's a big thing. And when you do get shoes, it'll say that. It'll say for heavier runners. It'll say for lighter runners. It'll say for wide foot to thin or something like that. So it's a good read the descriptions on it. And whenever it's a heavier runner, go with those and just see how those running shoes are with comments.
Okay. Can you
That's a good
comment
question too.
Can you comment on what you do to be mentally tough during a marathon?
Mentally focused during the marathon?
Yes.
Yeah. That's tough. I remember actually asking Bill Rogers. Bill Rogers has AD, and I remember asking him, "How do you stay focused for 2 hours?" My father had AD. I'm like, "How do you do that?" And he goes, "I'm just doing one thing, Paul. I'm focused on one thing." Because with AD, it's the distraction of other things that get you. And it's true. You focus on one thing. When you're running, what are you doing? You're running. Focus on your running. A lot of people do math in their head of your mileage. They'll go per mile, try to, think of other things to do. Here comes a mile. Okay, what's my mile? Okay, what's the next mile going to be? Do some math every 5 kilometers. One of the impetuses for my first book, The Boston Marathon History by the Mile, which takes you through the course. Each town has their own chapter, is that I looked around, and I love history and researching with my stories. I found different things. So when I ran, I distracted myself, even though staying focused for what I was doing, looking around, going, as we're going to do with this journey here. When I'm in different towns, I look to my left and right and go, oh, this is where Tarzan Brown did this. Oh, here's where Johnny Kelly got passed. Or here's where this happened. And it keeps you focused. It keeps you focused on what you're doing because you're thinking about the race that you're in. The Red Sox scores. Oh, yeah, this is where so-and-so, we have a chalkboard with the Red Sox that you'll see. And it keeps you focused on what you're doing. It's difficult because I ran between like 3 hours and 40 minutes in my heyday to about 7 hours. So I had a lot of time to think and a lot of time to stay focused. And it's tough. It's difficult. There are times you just get into a groove. I'd be running, and then also like 2 miles later, I'm 2 miles beyond where I thought I was. Going, whoa. Not that I passed out, but you just get into this real comfortable runner's high groove that it's like this big hand is behind you, pushing you gently, and all of a sudden everything's clicking, and you're just flying, and you're enjoying it, and you're loving it, and all of a sudden you're 2 miles more, and you go, whoa, that was awesome. Where'd that come from? It doesn't happen all the time, but you stay focused on it, and the people cheering, especially in Boston, really carries you on. If you do lose your focus, there are times, the 2012 marathon, really hot. When I went through Wellesley, it was 91 degrees, which I didn't really need to know, but the bank time temperature showed it. I was struggling up Heartbreak Hill, and there were people, spectators, yelling at me. I mean, yelling at me, more than my siblings did when I was a kid. I mean, they were, but in a good way. They knew I needed a push because I was walking up, and they could just see it on my face more than I did that I needed it. And it was great. It got me right back into it. It snapped me out of it. They weren't mean or nasty, but they were on me. It was great. I loved it, and they knew that. So there are a lot of different ways to stay focused with that, and it's interesting. During a training, you can say, "Hey, I'm at mile 21. I remember at home I was near, such and such a house. Oh, look where I am now." It's just you do these mental tricks and everything. So a lot of fun when you do that.
So, Paul, one more question, then we'll let you get back
Sure.
to your presentation.
Sure.
Can you recommend any books that you've read that helped motivate you?
Wow.
Aside from the ones you wrote.
I know. I was going to say, yeah. Well, for the pure history, which really gets me pumped up, is Tom Derderian's book that just chronicles every year. He doesn't just do the race; he incorporates history with each race. So I always would read something like that, and it just puts me right into that race. Whatever the year is, whereas during the war years or during the 60s or 70s, the running booms, whatever, which is great. He would do that. He would tell you what the world was, what the country was, and what running was at this time, in addition to the race itself, the action of the race itself. And a lot of those things stick with me while I'm running. Even before I wrote my books, I would remember that. So I'd be running through whichever town it was, and it would just pop. It'd be in my head because I read the book. It'd pop in my head of some historical aspect that he wrote about. And I go, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm running on the same road that Johnny Kelly did and then he took the lead here. It's a real neat thing. One of the only sports, really, that you are competing on the exact same arena, so to speak, as the greats, the Tarzan Brown, the Clarence DeMars, and everything. So that really puts you in tune with the history. You're part of that legacy and history. I highly recommend it. He just updated it, too, I think last year or the year before, with Med Kofetsky on the cover. So that's worth, if you're going to read anything about Boston, start with that one, because that just is so expansive. It's just because he did the history in addition to each race.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, no problem. Keep them coming. I'll have the questions.
Okay.
The next one, I think, should be the rainy one, where a lot of the runners, we're in Framingham now, and this was in 2018 when it poured out. For anyone who's watching who ran that one, sorry, I put the photo in to remind you. It was a cold, I did not run this year, that year in 2018. I have run Boston a couple of times where it was a torrential downpour, like hurricane rain, but it was not this cold. In 2018, it was cold. You can tell by the legs of the runners that it's really red. This is only about 6 miles in, and you look at them and you think they've already run about 20-something miles. But this is 6 miles in just before the water stopped in Framingham. And it was like a wind-swept rain that just was, it was horrible. It was just facing them. It was a headwind. And I put this in for a number of reasons. Somebody was asking me before about the weather. Lovely New England April weather. It has snowed. It has rained. It has been in the 90s, which is horrible. It has been sleet. There was an eclipse before my time. It's been all weather. And so you really don't know until you get closer to it what it's going to be like and how do you prepare. It's funny when you look at this picture, another reason I like this photo is that not everyone's wearing the same thing. Some people are just wearing their regular shorts and shirts, some have the hat, some have the garbage bags over. It all works. Whatever works for you, try it during your training. I always advise runners that when they're training for any marathon, always try to run a couple of miles in the rain, in hot weather, in cool weather. Try to vary it. Now, you'll kind of know whatever marathon you're doing, what it might be. But it's good, especially in Boston, for the Boston Marathon. If it's going to rain out at home, go out and do a couple of miles in the rain. Nothing bad, nothing long, nothing speed work. Just get your skin, get your psyche prepared for rain or snow if you want. But just run in different kinds of weather during your training. Just every once in a while, just to get your skin used to it, your mentality used to it. So whatever does occur, it's not going to be the same. Like this here, you don't want to go run out, prepare, train on a storm, but you get used to it. And it's one less thing to really worry about, which is so many other things to worry about. So especially with the weather. But again, I apologize for putting this in for those of you who did run that year, 2018. The next photo in Framingham. You see the train station on your left. The roads are much wider here, which is great. So you start to really get a good distance from the other runners, so you can get your own pace. Really work it. Stretch your legs out just a little bit here. Interesting story. 1907 in Framingham. If you see just up ahead, you see some stop sign lights over the road. There are tracks that go over there. And in 1907, Thomas Longboat, who ended up winning it, he and about a half dozen other runners who were in the lead, they kept hearing, to your left are train tracks, and throughout the race, even to now, they'll beat their horn while you're running, and they follow the course for a good amount of miles, which is neat, kind of cheer you on. But in 1907, the train was getting closer and closer and louder, and then Longboat and a couple of those runners was looking at going, this train's not stopping, so they really ran faster over the track, and sure enough, the train went right over the course, kept going, didn't stop. So you had 6 runners ahead of the train, as the train keeps going, and the train cut everyone else away. So now all the other runners had to wait until the train went through this crosswalk area there. Meanwhile, the top 6 runners are getting more and more distance between them. I remember joking with Dave McKeelby about that, and he goes, that will not happen. Don't worry. Race director's worst fear. But yeah, the train, because there's tracks there that cut across the course, and the train actually cut across the course. So that's not something you want, unless you're, the 5 or 6 runners who beat it. The next one, we will be in Natick now. You'll see a chalkboard that shows the Red Sox score. Back when the marathon started at noon, The Red Sox game started at 10:30-ish. So when the leaders were going through Kenmore Square, which is right near Fenway Park, the game would be letting out. So you had like 20 or 30,000 extra people riding Kenmore Square for the leaders. It was a great timing. It's a little different now because there's a bunch of different starts for the marathon. I think there's like 8 or 9 starts between 9-ish and like 11:30. It's different ones. But the game's still on, and you still get like thousands and more fans on Kenmore Square. But what's interesting is that in the old days, you get the radio would be on for us locals. We'd be cheering on the Red Sox. You have little kids telling you the score. This is in Natick right across the lake, and you get this. And what's interesting is out-of-staters or people from different countries have no idea what a Sox is. They go, what is this? What's inning Sox Seattle? Oh, it's the Boston Red Sox, baseball. Oh, okay. But they had no idea. But we did. We loved it. And the lake on the right here, the runners, this is probably about 9 miles-ish, I think, before you get to the center. The legend has it in the 1930s, Tarzan Brown, one of our greatest marathons, Ellison Tarzan Brown from Rhode Island. It was a real hot marathon, and the legend has it that he jumped off the course, went into the water, cooled off, jumped back down the course, and continued on to win, which is sort of mythical, sort of true. What he actually did was, because the road configuration was a little different, no guardrail, is that it was a hot day, but he kind of just took his shoes off and cooled his feet off, because as runners know, your feet expand in the heat. So he did that just to cool his feet off, put his shoes back on. I like both stories, so I tell him. Take pictures when you want. The next photo actually shows you entering Natick Center. It's about 10-mile mark. On your left is the old American Legion with the flag, which is no longer there. It's stores, and it's just redone now. But I like this photo because you would hear that flag flap as you were approaching it. Also on your left, there used to be, I can't remember if we still do it now, the flatbed truck with a gentleman who would be singing. Really good voice, too. He'd be singing these Neil Diamond, Elvis songs. You'd have the high collar, sequin, long-sleeve shirt. If you ever seen Neil Diamond, which I have a couple of times. That's what he looked like. Great voice. You could hear him before you'd see him. It was really neat. It really picked you up. You're about 10 miles now, so you're still in good shape as a runner, but you still like your little boosts. And Natick always had great spectators on either side. You're a little closer now than they were in Framingham on the road. And Natick Center that you'll see right near where that church tower is Natick Common, which is great because the people really cheer you on and really close. Right beyond that church spire, the second one, if you want to go to the next photo, you'll see a reverse image, so to speak. On your right is the fire department. And on hot days, they would have, as residents would too, hoses to hose you down if you want to get cooled off. This photo I took, you see sort of in the center of that driveway, that's the fire department's driveway. They had their Hazmat Tunnel where firefighters, it's a portable Hazmat Tunnel where water, it's like a shower, water comes in from the sides on the inside. So the firefighters would wash off their uniform before they would leave fire, so they would walk through that. In 2012, when I took this, like I told you, it was when I went through Wellesley, it was in the 90s. It was in the 80s for most everyone else because they were faster. You would run through that tunnel just to get cold. So I wanted to take a picture of it for my book. So I'm taking this picture. I'm realizing no one's going by me until I lowered my camera and looked over, and people were just going in and out of that tunnel like 2 or 3 times because as soon as you went through, you dried off. It was so hot. It was so refreshing. So it was a great thing to have. It was kind of thing you wish you could, there's a lot of rollers that you wish you could roll it with you. That would have been perfect. But those are great. I don't think 2018 they had any water there. The next photo, we're going to enter Wellesley now. One of the great things about the Boston Marathon, everyone hears about the Scream Tunnel in Wellesley College. Ever since the first race, all but 1 year, the Wellesley students have been out cheering on the runners. The first year, there was a runner from Harvard that some of the women knew. So they came out and cheered, and every year they've done that. In the old days, the Boston Marathon was run on Patriots' Day, April 19th. Whatever day of the week that was, except for a Sunday, it would be run. So the Boston Marathon in the old days could be on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Friday, whatever April 19th was. So one of the years it did fall on the Easter break for Wellesley College, so they weren't there that year. But other than that, they've been there every year. And the reason it's called a Scream Tunnel is in the old days, the students would be on both sides of the runners, like this black and white photo that Wellesley College provided me. Since 1996, the centennial, they've had fencing on the left side of the runners. And obviously since the bombing, they've been really strict with people who are on the course itself. So since then, the students have only been on the campus side where Mungar Hall is right there in the photo. So it's no longer really a tunnel. But that's the area it was, about a quarter mile long, and they do not stop. They cheer. It's amazing. You hear them before you see them. I've had people from out of state that I just happened to be running with saying, is that the train coming because the tracks are still to your left? I said, no, it could be, but it's probably a couple hundred women cheering. And they said, what? I said, yeah. Told them the whole story. As you approach, they are so loud. It's unbelievable. What they do now, if you want to go to the next photo, is a few years ago for social media, what they started to do is you could send in messages. And the students, as you can see here, would write down on nice big boards these messages that they would put on the fencing. So you could be, say you're in Texas or Arizona and your kid is running the marathon, but you can't make it. You send them a social media post, Facebook or whatever they wanted to use, Twitter, and say, hey, can you say, hey, Johnny, good luck, your mom and dad love you, Texas, whatever. And they would do that. For a few weeks before the marathon, they make all these pictures and all these nice posts and signs. All those signs, not all, but most of the signs you see are sent through social media, which is great. I didn't know that when they first started, but it's a great idea. It's like Kiss Me runners, things like that. It's a real good, it's around 13-mile mark area, a little bit before that. It really gets you motivated, gives you a second wind if you need it. It's be cautious, though, as a runner. Mostly guys more than women. I can say that because I'm a guy. We'll try to show off with the women and kind of, stand up straighter, draw our chest out, run a little faster. Hey, how you doing? Sort of show off. Whereas the women runners still enjoy everything, get their high fives, but they still stay focused.
So,
they still
Paul,
maintain their pace. Yes.
excuse me, Paul, we have another question. Someone would like to know about your average pace per mile and whether your pace increased or decreased as the race went on.
I was pretty steady. Again, like I said earlier, my best was 3 hours and 47 minutes, 3:46. My worst was 2012, where it was 7 hours and 12 minutes. So pick your pace there. But I was pretty steady with my training, depending on what my speed work did. With Boston, the first 14 miles, you're kind of running one same pace. I'd probably average then, again, depending on where I was doing, my 8 or 9 or 10-minute miles. And then you could see you change because your stride should change for the lower falls, the first hill. Then you go over Route 128 hill and then the Newton Hills. So your stride will change and you'll slow up a little bit unless you've done a lot of good hill work. And then you could return to your pace on Beacon Street, which has rolling hills. I'm getting ahead of myself, but you get little rolling hills, but you can get back into your little pace because, you run better on the flats than you do on the hill, depending on your speed work and everything. But I stayed pretty steady. I know some people, and I tried to incorporate this, will break it up into 3 stages, like into thirds, so just divide, maybe 8.5 miles, whatever. First 8 or 9 miles, you do one sort of a little slower pace, sort of preserve your energy, but still maintain a good pace. Again, you do this in training. Then the next third, which would get you through the Wellesley, the Natick and Wellesley, where we are right now. You step it up a little bit because your pace is going to change. Your leg strike is going to change a bit because you're starting on the hill. So then you're ready for the last third. When you're going up the hill, your leg stride is much different than it was, say, in Ashland or Framingham, where you can stretch out a little bit. You got to shorten your stride. Again, you do this and you replicate this in training too. And if you do that and you maintain good hydration, you can stay pretty steady unless you want to speed up. I've never done a negative split, whereas the second half is faster than your first half. But some people have, and they've trained that way. And again, if it's a beautiful, gorgeous, cool day, that helps you as well. But I always stay pretty steady with that, which is good. It helps me with my math as I'm running.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question? Do you have another question? No?
No, not right now.
That's okay. Okay, so in Wellesley still with the women putting those signs together, which I thought was great. The next photo, we're leaving Wellesley going into Newton. This is the lower falls I was telling you about. The first real hill. So up until this point, you're running, like I was just saying, you're running pretty steady. Your stride's kind of the same. You should stretch it a little bit before you get to this point. Just change your stride a bit just to flex your other muscles that you're going to be using going up and down hill. You'll see the entering Newton sign on your left. The 16-mile mark is just around the bend here. This is just before the Route 128 overpass, where you're going over the highway, which is an incline. So you're going down this hill, which is the first one. Then you're going to go up over 128. So this is the first time you really got to stretch your muscles to do those downhill and uphill. I remember Coach Squires, Bill Squires, who coached the Greater Boston Track Club first 10 or so years. He coached Bill Rogers, Alberto Salazar, Greg Meyer, great American runners who won the Boston Marathon in the 70s and 80s. Did a great thing about here in the Lower Falls that he, back then with the running boom, the club started in 1973. Coach Squires learned a lot of things to help runners out that everyone does now, but back then you really didn't do. And one of them was cutting the tangent of a road, which means if you're running a race and you come across a turn, don't go wide like a truck. Cut a tangent, go close to the turn. So if you're going to turn left, go right close to the left curb. Like, cut your tangent like that. And a lot of runners back then, he said, would just follow the double yellow line. Go, well, this is the middle of the road, I'll just keep running the middle of the road, which in New England especially dips a little bit for rain drainage, so it's a little higher than the rest of the road. So to implant this philosophy in their heads, he brought all these great runners on a training run one Sunday, and he brought a tennis ball, and he put the tennis ball on the top of the hill, kind of behind this photo, behind me where I took it, and just placed it on the road and said, follow this tennis ball. And the tennis ball went down the hill to the path of least resistance. It didn't go in the middle of the road, went to the edge, went around the tangent and everything. So just to get a visual in the runner's heads what to do, and that's what they started to do. They do it all the time now, but these little things, this is where he did that little trick with a tennis ball. Some people may have heard that story. So this is the first real hill, and then, like I say, you go up Route 128, 95, which is great. You'll hear the cars beeping their horns at you, which is kind of neat. And sometimes you get a breeze from all those cars. And then the Newton Wellesley Hospital will be on your right, golf course on your left. So you have a nice little flat recovery until you get to the fire station on your right, and you get to take a turn out the Comm Ave. And you will feel a breeze. You'll actually feel an ocean breeze, even though you're miles away. Because for the first 17 miles, you're only going one way, basically, from west to east. Your first turn, really, is this turn out the Comm Ave. You're now going toward the city. And the wind can actually change direction. And that's the first of the Newton Hill that you go up. The next photo that you'll see is Johnny Kelly statue in Newton at about 19.1 miles. What's neat about the hills is there's enough recovery, there's enough flats in between each hill to recover. So as you're going up each hill, you shorten your stride, you lean forward as you've been training, and then usually just when you're about really bushed and tired, it'll flatten off and you'll get a nice flat recovery until the next hill. And these are the areas that Coach Squires had his guys do, the Kenyans do this a lot, to really grind out the competitors. And say Bill Rogers is approaching these hills, and there's a guy right on his shoulder. Well, he'll go up the hill normal speed, because you don't really want to race up the hill. And during the flats, like Bill Rogers would do real fast run and interval, basically in training for a race. He'll run very fast to gain some speed. And then again, to the next hill, he'll return to his hill speed. Meanwhile, the guy in second place goes, I got to catch up to Bill Rogers. He just got a lead on me. By the time he thinks in doing that, he's trying to catch up to Bill on the hill. Bill knows that. So when Bill gets to the top of the next hill, he takes off and goes faster on the flat and builds up another lead. Goes to the next hill. The guy in second goes, I got to do it again. By the time he gets to the top hill, Heartbreak Hill, he shredded the guy behind him because he's not prepared for that kind of hill work, which the Greater Boston guys had trained on these hills and everything. Gelino Bordin did this in 1990 when he won because he was used to training on the Italian hills. So at the Johnny Kelly statue here, one of the things Johnny did in 1935, Johnny the Elder Kelly, there's two Johnny Kellys. Johnny the Younger Kelly is a BAA member. He won it in 1957 from Connecticut. Great runner. Johnny the Elder Kelly, Cape Cod guy, he won it in 1935, so he was favored in 1936. So he's approaching this area in 1936, and ahead of him is Tarzan Brown, again, one of the great runners. He won Boston Marathon as well. And he caught up to Tarzan about 20 miles, 20 and a half, right before Boston College. And he caught up to Tarzan and sort of tapped him on the back, kind of like in a way like, this is my race, I'll take over, which sort of woke up Tarzan, and Tarzan just took off and ended up winning, and Johnny Kelly came in fifth that year, 1936. And Jerry Nason, the sports writer for the Globe, was covering it, covered that move in his is a sports article, and said that move of Johnny's broke Johnny's heart, and that morphed into Heartbreak Hill. And the statue here is at 19.1 miles, about a mile before Heartbreak Hill, and it depicts two versions of Johnny Kelly. On the left is the younger version of Johnny winning in 1935, holding hands with Johnny on the right in 1990s finishing. And it's called Young at Heart, which he would always sing. And it's great. It faces the runners. It's tough to see as you're running the Boston Marathon. You sort of have to really look to your left to see it. It's about 80 feet or so from Comm Ave. But it's about 19.1 mile mark. It's about a mile before Heartbreak Hill. And Heartbreak Hill itself, you'll see in the next photo here. This is a 21 mile mark. It's the top of Heartbreak Hill. Heartbreak's about 20 and a half or so. BC Gas and Halls on your right. You see the Gothic building. This is the top of the hill. On the left, sort of in distance, you see a medical tent, little white part there. That's Bill Rogers always half-jokingly says this is his favorite place to quit. When he first ran it, he didn't finish his first attempt. He stopped here. He's a BC guy, too. He went to BC to get one of his degrees. When he ran again in the 2000s, he ran for charity. He stopped here as well. So always half-joking. But also what he means is, too, the elite runners, if they're not having a good race, whether it's Boston or any marathon, and say they're out of the top 10 at this point, they're just not feeling it. No injury, but just not feeling it. They'll stop at around 20, 21, 22 miles. You'll see this in the Olympics sometimes. Rarely, but you'll see it. Elite marathoners have basically 2 marathons to run a year. You can run a marathon every week if you want, but the elite athletes who compete, they do one in the fall, one in the spring, one in the fall. And say they're running Boston and they're in 15th place or so, and they're just not feeling it, and they're out of prize money. They know if they can finish Boston, probably be top 20, no good prize money in their eyes. They'll stop around the 20, 21 mile mark, and to them, they say themselves they can run a marathon in about a month competitively. To them, this would be just a training run for them. So Bill was sort of half-joking where, he would stop, but elite athletes you'll see once in a while just step off around the 20, 21 miles and just save themselves instead of pushing it, not doing too well, and then they have nothing until the fall. So in a way, sort of the area that they'll stop off. The other side of this hill, the next photo that you'll see entering Brighton, Lake Street is just to the left. Boston College is still to your right. St. Ignatius Church is right to the edge there. It looks a little different because they redid Moore Hall that you'll see on the right there. This is a tough stretch because there's a cemetery right beyond the tree line there. There's no spectators on the left because that's where the green line is. It's a tough stretch because you've done all the hills, you've done all the popular highlights, so to speak, the Scream Tunnel and all that kind of thing. Now it's just like down and dirty. You just got to buckle down. You still have 3, 4, 5 miles to go in this area. It can get cold if you're running slow because of the breeze right here. And the cemetery on the right, Dave McGilvey has a terrific story. He often says the first year he ran, his grandfather was waiting for him somewhere down the Kenmore Square area, and was going to cheer him on. So Dave was all excited. So the year he first ran, he quit right around here, right about where the tree line is. And he was really disappointed in himself. And his grandfather said later, he goes, "That's okay." He goes, "You learned something about the race. Next year I'll be in the same spot. Next year I'll cheer you on." Unfortunately, his grandfather passed away prior to the following year, and Dave ran it again. And he stopped at around the same spot, right beyond this tree line, just because he just couldn't get over the hump. This is where a lot of people hit the wall, too, depending on your hydration and everything. It's a tough spot. But then Dave realized, yes.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but we do have another question.
Sure.
Someone would like to know if you've ever had to stop during a marathon because of a blister or chafing. And if so, how did you get yourself back into it?
Not stop. Chafing once in a while. What I'll do is I'll run toward a medical tent to get Vaseline. And I'll grab, because they have Vaselines. Sometimes the medical people are just standing there with it. And they have rubber gloves on and they have a big pile of Vaseline on their hands, and you kind of run by and you grab a bunch. Usually my armpits, if my short sleeve shirt's chafing or something, and I won't stop. If it's somewhere else I have to stop, I'll do that. The only blister I ever got, I did the Honolulu Marathon, and you're running on volcanic ground, so you get this radial heat that comes up. You don't get that here in Boston and anywhere else. But because it's a volcano, you get heat from above, from below. It just comes up. So I remember my coach, my high school coach, would say that if you start to feel a blister, if you just start to feel a blister, which is the layers of skin in your toes, whatever, rubbing against each other, when you first start to feel heat on a certain specific point, put a Band-Aid on it. So you're basically pressing the skin together. So what I did is in Honolulu, I had some Band-Aids with me just for that occasion. Sure enough, I was going around the volcano there, Diamond Head, and I stopped, I sat on the guardrail, took my running shoes, socks off, put a Band-Aid, wrapped around my big toe, put them back on, and took off, and it worked. Stopping, Jeff Galloway has, the Olympic runner, has a great thing called, he did this for, he started for charity runners, where you run a mile, walk a minute. And the reason I'm saying this is that the heart rate stays the same for that minute that you walk. So what you do is you run a mile, and you get to the water station, you start walking. You grab your water, drink your water. When the minute ends, you continue running. Your heart doesn't know you stopped. It's still pumping, it's still doing it. The longer you walk, the longer you rest, your heart will eventually go back to normal. So I think the question might be referring to something like that too. You don't want your heart rate to stop, not stop. You don't want your heart rate to slow down enough that your legs start to feel heavy because the blood pools. That's what the heaviness feels like. So if you do stop, like physically stop, it's okay to do that. Just try to go pick up pretty quickly, or speed walk, just to keep you going. It's easy to get right back in the race. So if I do have to get to Vaseline or some paper towels, or I drop something and I go back and get it, my watch or whatever, it's so quick, within a minute or so, I'm right back in. And mentally, I'm right back in. Physically, heart rate's still pumping, I'm right back in. So it is easy just to go pick it right up. I was wondering about that too, the first few marathons like that. I don't want to stop. I got to keep going, but it's okay. Bill Rogers, the first Boston Marathon he won in 1975, he stopped 4 or 5 times. He physically stopped, leaned over, tied his shoe, stopped to get water, and he won. So it can be done.
Okay.
Any other question?
Nope. I'll let you know.
Nope. All right. So I'll pick up with the Dave McGilvery thing, is that he realized where he stopped was the cemetery, the Evergreen Cemetery near D.C. here, where his grandfather was buried. So that gave him a little second wind. He ended up finishing. And then every marathon, every Boston since then, he stopped and paid his respect, which he still does. He's the last starter. Everyone probably knows this by now. Once the marathon's on, he goes to Hopkinton with some state troopers, and he runs the course several hours after everyone else does, and he pays his respects to his grandfather right around this corner, which is kind of neat. So it's a great story to keep you going. The next photo, we're on the backstretch here, Cleveland Circle. We're entering Brighton, as I said. You're in Brighton, going into Beacon Street here. That train, the green line, is the track that you see sort of cut across the course down there. You approach as a runner from your left. You go down that hill. You take a sharp left onto Beacon Street. One of the years, Patty Dillon, Patty Catalano back then, Patty Dillon now from Connecticut, she came in twice. She was a runner-up 2 years in a row, 1979, 1980. So 1980, she's favored again, and she really wants to get this thing through to victory. And back then, they didn't really have much fencing. They had some police officers on horses keeping the crowds back. A lot of crowds, but not that much fencing, which we have a lot now. And she's coming down this hill, Chestnut Hill Ave here on the left. And back then, men and women started at noon, so she doesn't really know. You can't really tell if she's passed a woman or not yet back then. So she's looking behind her, and she's ready to take that left onto Beacon Street. And one of the police horses stepped back into the course. And she wasn't looking, and she slams right into the hindquarters of the horse. And it sort of bounces off the horse. It almost falls, but there's enough runners around her to sort of pick her up. Tom Dederin is actually one of them. And she's really dazed. And as she's sort of dazed from this happening, Alice Monroe came around and from second place to pass Patty and ended up winning, and Patty came in second place for the third straight year. I remember asking about that, how that was to hit her. He goes, it's just very hard. Because even though it's a horse, flesh and bone, it's like smacking right into a wall. He goes, I was seeing stars for about a half a mile. I was like, ooh, that hurts. Yeah, to the horse, but I didn't care. The next photo, we are on Beacon Street. 23-mile mark that you see on your right. Do remember, like I mentioned before, there are rolling hills on Beacon Street. As you can see here, that you're so high up, it's a 23-mile mark. If you look straight ahead in the photo, you will see the Prudential building and the John Hancock building. So you do have some elevation, even on Beacon Street, high enough that you can see the skyline. It's good that you see where the finish line is, so you can take that as a positive. The next photo, still on Beacon Street. I always ask the audience members if they can guess why I put this photo in. But what's interesting is that if you see on top of Beacon Street the words Boston Line, you were only in Boston proper for a mile and a half of the Boston Marathon. You're in Brookline and some neighborhoods, but as far as Boston proper, a mile and a half, and that's where you begin right there. The only place that says, doesn't even say entering Boston like those other big silver signs that you see. This says Boston Line, which is parallel to Beacon Street, so sometimes you don't even see it. This is about half a mile or so before the Mass Pike overpass to get your bearings as you're entering Kenmore Square. So this is the only place that tells you that you're entering Boston, which I think is kind of interesting. I always missed that when I was running it. The next photo gives you 1 mile to go in Kenmore Square, which is great. You'll love it. I tell people, unless you have a broken foot or something, if you're hurting and you're just not feeling well, the crowd alone will carry you this last mile. It is amazing. It even says 1 mile to go on the ground to Kenmore Square. This photo was taken in the Centennial. You'll see Ronald McDonald on the top right, overlooking the building. It's kind of funny. But you'll love it from this, especially from this point on. All your training, all your goal setting, and everything is coming to fruition, and it's a great mile to finish. And you're going to look forward to that. It'll carry you through. You'll love it. The next photo is an older photo, black and white, of the old finish line. We used to be on Ring Road, which was parallel to Boylston Street. This is right in front of the Prudential Center, which looks a little different now. This is from 1966. From 1965 to 85, it finished on this road. All the Bill Rogers wins and things finished on this little Ring Road, a side road. It's a big cement patio right now. But that's where the finish line was for those with the, like I said, the Bob Hall, wheelchair athlete, Bill Rogers, Joan Benoit Samuelson, the 60s and 70s. When John Hancock gave the BAA $1 billion in 1986 for prize money and everything, they basically said, don't cash a check unless you move the finish line. We don't want to have our finish line in front of our competitor, the Prudential Insurance. Let's move the finish line down a little bit. So that's why the finish line now is more toward the John Hancock Tower, former John Hancock Tower near the Boston Public Library. That you'll see in the next photo, a little closer up shot of the finish line that they have fixed. Dave McGilvey always jokes that he's the only marathon he knows of that paints the finish line after the race, which is true. A few days after the marathon, they paint the finish line so people can take pictures of it for the rest of the year. But for the marathon itself, they put down this nice little latex adhesive, and it's reverse lettering, as you can see. Some people wonder about that. As a runner, when you're approaching the finish line and look backwards, or upside down, I should say, it's for the photographers. When the photographers are taking pictures of the runners, when they get their photos, it's readable. That's why. But everyone else, it looks like it's wrong. But that's the finish line right there that they put on, which is really nice. They do this about a day or two before the marathon. And I'll close out. The last photo basically capsulizes the Boylston Street stretch that we just went over. You'll see the bottom right corner shows the finish line, the yellow strip. The top left corner shows Hereford Street and the fire station, where you turn off of Hereford Street and go onto Boylston Street. That early finish line black and white photo, you'll see the little open cement patch right around there towards the left. The Boston Public Library is at the bottom rightish, the white square at the top of the library. And just off the picture below that is where the old finish lines were, where the old BAA clubhouse was, where the old Irvington Street Oval was, where the BAA games were. None of that's there now, but that location-wise, that's about where it was. But that's a nice little overview that you show Boylston Street, which I'll end with this, that as a runner, you have like a love-hate relationship with this stretch. You hate it because you run 26 miles. You want it to over with. You're hurting probably. You just want to be done, but you love it because the cheers echo off the buildings. Everything you've done for a year, all those times you missed picking up your kid, or you ran instead of having lunch, you rearranged your life, was all for this moment. You don't want it to win. But then you want it to win because you run 26 miles. So it's a weird relationship, but it's a great stretch. That's the pavement that you've been training for all year, is that here. So I'll end it with there. If there's any questions or anything that came up late that I can address. If not, so I want to thank Morrell Memorial Library and Brian and April and everyone who tuned in. I hope I entertained you, got you through the course quite well, and for those of you who are going to run either this year or in other years, I hope this helps you through it. And again, I want to thank everyone for it. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Okay, we do have one final question.
Sure.
Paul? Okay. Somebody is a big fan of yours and says the presentation has been fabulous and wants to know what kind of mileage you're currently running. And do you run on the street or on tracks, on a running track?
A running track or treadmill or actual track? Well, I don't run on treadmill. Yeah. I've never run on treadmill.
But how about on a track, like a athletic track?
Yeah, speed work I'll do. Right now I run for 5Ks and 10Ks. After 43 marathons, I probably have 2 more in me, so I want to save them. Knock on wood, I haven't had an injury. Coach Squires helped me when I worked for John Hancock. Coach helped me with a lot of tricks and things and training that I actually put in the book too. Just great stuff. A lot of things that I tell people to do, I always credit him training-wise. So right now I do 5K road races. Up to about 10K, so I run for that. So I'll do my 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, depending on which race I'm training for. On a track, I'll do my track work. If I'm doing speed work, 200s or 400s, which means when you run around a track, first 200 meters you go slow, second 200 speed it up, next 200 go slow, alternate 400, which is a full length of a track. Or if the roads are like in the winter, I'll go to a local track and just do my normal mileage on a track, so I'm not on. Sometimes the track will be clearer, more clear than a sidewalk or a road type thing. So yeah, I'll keep doing that. You never stop, really. My father didn't start until his 40s, and he ran a number of half marathons. So it's a great sport that you can start anytime. I know some of the great Canadian runner who I did a story on. She was really good in high school, college, didn't run for 15 years, stopped, had kids, didn't run for 15 years, started running again. She won the 2008 Masters division at Boston, and she's still an elite runner. So it's one of those sports that, results vary, but it's a great sport. You can keep going, even speed walking, or just dragging your feet. It doesn't matter. Just the exercise that gets you out there. And if you want to turn it up a bit for road races, it's great to have you outdoors too. So yeah, that's where I am. Right. And I appreciate the compliment too. Thank you very much. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
I think everyone did. Thank you so much, Paul. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay.
Oh.
Terrific.
Oh, thank you very much. It was great.
Thanks
I loved
again.
It. It was great.
Good night, Paul.